Okay, well, hi. Hi YouTube as well, I guess. Um, we've been doing Bertrand Russell's outline of philosophy, and we're on chapters 7 and 8 now. And to be kind of honest, I don't think too much new stuff was introduced in these chapters. It was just kind of like going over stuff that was already discussed in the past ones, with the exception of this idea of induction, which we also have kind of talked about in past book clubs. But just like briefly summarizing what these chapters were talking about. Chapter 7 was about, what's the title of chapter 7? It is Inference as a Habit. So it's trying to figure out what inference is, and when we draw inferences, what we mean by that. And so Russell's saying that more or less the ability to draw inferences is some sort of like sign of intelligence. If an animal or a person can draw inferences, reasonable, like any type of reasonable inferences, then we can kind of mark, check the box to say it has some degree of like intelligence or some degree of like grasp about the world. If there's no food in the fridge, you can infer that someone ate it, or make like good guesses about what's going to happen, what has happened. And then he introduces this term that was kind of made famous or popularized by David Hume, this idea of induction. So induction is this idea that we can take stuff that's happened in the past and then use it to reasonably predict stuff that's going to happen in the future. Hume came around and kind of took a sledgehammer at that, and he was like, well, hold on a second. Why are we saying that just because things happen before, they're going to happen again? Where is the logical truth or the logical conclusion that we're drawing from that statement? Just because the sun rose yesterday, why are we so confident or so sure that it's going to rise today? Um, and Russell's saying he's trying to incorporate these behaviorist ideas that we talked about, these like conditioned reflexes that we go about the world, we learn about stuff through um, stimulus and then the reactions to certain stimulus. Like we learn that something is hot because when we touched it one time, there was a reaction there of us getting burnt. So this is how we go about learning everything. We there's a stimulus and there's an effect. We know that uh, food will make us feel full because when we eat it, we feel full. And so this induction, he's kind of equivocating it to, or trying, he's making it like the same as conditioned reflexes or like associations that we draw. When we say that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, we're just saying that there's some sort of a connection that we're used to seeing the sun rise every morning when we grow up. And it's the same thing when we're using verbal induction. So verbal induction is just like a more complicated version of physical induction, or physical reflexes. So like when the dogs salivate at the sight of food, um, you can more or less compare that to us making verbal induction, saying like, "Oh, tomorrow it's going to be hot," or "Yesterday it was cold," or things like that, or yeah, just tomorrow it's going to be hot. And then he brings in this idea of the meaning of words and their forms. And so, like, I think he's kind of talking about forms in this Aristotelian slash Platonic sense, where he says that the meaning of a word, um, it has this like essential property or this essential form that's different than its actual material thing. So, for instance, the word like car, um, it can be in different fonts, it can be in different colors, it can be in all capitals. I can give you, I can say car in a different language, but the essential meaning of car is still there in all of those different instantiations, whether it's in all capitals or lowercase or in the letter blue. It's always going to be car. It still has that like same essential meaning. So when we say statements like your house is on fire, we get a similar reaction, like bodily reaction or mental reaction, whatever you want to call it. We get the same reaction as if we were to actually see our house being on fire. It's like those words almost, they have the same impact on us than a type of real world like solid stimulus effect relationship. So the words have this ability to evoke these effects. Then he goes about to say, okay, well, there's these types of inferences we have in day-to-day life that are like commonsensical, but what about things? And he gives a really cool example here of like of learning, or how we start to pick up these relationships of forms with this, like a little story of his son, I think, or of a boy, where one day he's eating this sandwich that's missing one corner basically, and Russell says, well, that's a triangle. And so obviously the sandwich has a lot of properties. It has the properties of being edible, of being soft, of having peanut butter in it, smelling a certain way, and so on. The next day comes around, and then that little kid is able to point at something out on the sidewalk and say, look, a triangle. So at that point, that was like a demonstration of that kid being able to grasp the essential form or the essential meaning of the word triangle. Um, and so he's saying that this is a little bit different than mathematical inferences. Mathematical inferences, like 1 plus 1 equals 2, or just like these truths that we have, he defines it as relating stuff to fixed conventions. So when we say triangle, there's a lot of different conventions in which it could be said. It can be said in terms of like geometry, in terms of like the way something looks, in terms of, I don't know, the pyramids or whatever. But when it comes to math, there's very, very fixed conventions and very, very rigid rules. And that's how we draw mathematical inferences. In day-to-day life, we learn that A equals B. So we can say that, I don't know, fire is hot. And then we know that hot stuff burns us. So then we can make the jump and say, okay, fire burns us. We can like take out the is hot, the middle thing. And we can just like take a sign or a symbol of something, a representation of something, relate it to something else, and then to something else. A equals B, and then B can equal C, therefore A equals C type stuff. So there's some really, I don't know, I feel like he's not saying anything like groundbreaking in these chapters. He's just going over um, more or less like common sense things about like how we infer stuff about the world. He then talks about like knowledge a little bit, and how knowledge is a matter of degree. It's like how sensitive we can be um, to something out in the world means how much knowledge we can have about that thing in the world. So, for example, he uses examples of like thermometers or scales. So a scale can like pick up the weight of something either like 1 kilogram or 0.1 kilogram or 0.001 kilogram. And depending on how sensitive it is, we can say that that instrument knows more about that thing that it's measuring. And we are the same way. We come to know about things to different like to different degrees, because we can either be more or less sensitive to them. The way we know that people can have this knowledge or animals can have this knowledge is because they act advantageously to the presentation of those stimulus. So we know that an animal can be sensitive to light because when it's very bright, it'll close its eyes, or it'll act in a way that's like advantageous or helpful to itself, more or less. Then he talks about desire a little bit, and how desire plays like a really strong role in this like conditioning of humans. So usually with animals, it's just the case that like they go and find food when they're hungry, or they eat when they're hungry. There's this desire for food because there's like a primal a primal need for food or whatever. But humans, we kind of go a step further, and we start to attach things to it. Like we don't only just love food now, we love hunting, or the art of hunting. It like turns into like a craft. And now all of a sudden we like hunting even if we're not very, very hungry. We've made like that connection with food, hunting, being having a full belly. Well, now all of a sudden we only like hunting, or we like preparing for the hunt and turn it into a craft and all that type of stuff. Just saying like, yeah, we make associations. And he's finally saying, and he just finally says that, yeah, the response to that is a stimulus involving a desire. With any type of desire, or any type of reaction to desire, stimulus to desire, I mean, is a form of knowledge, basically, which is like, okay, I get it. But that's it, I guess. That's the only like summary, the only thing I have to say. I know Ori, if he was in this book club, he'd probably get a little bit upset at me for not loving it. But I feel like nothing beyond like Psych 101, or like just like introduction to psychology, or like conditioning reflexes stuff was being said here. I don't know, did you guys read it, and what did you think? Did any of you guys read?
Yeah, I read it. I read it today actually. I don't know. I guess I'm not struggling. I'm not enjoying it, but I kind of I agree with you. I love the examples that he uses, and I do find it interesting. But it is I took psychology for A level, and we covered like most of the stuff in A level, and then the stuff that he points out is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it's just kind of like, oh, that's pretty self evident. You can almost argue. I guess the stuff he was talking about with behavioralism the last two chapters was quite interesting. He like adds little bits in there, but other than that, yeah, I mean, it's not my favorite text we've studied so far, but that's just kind of my initial thoughts. I don't know.
Yeah. Cooper, Icarus, did you have some thoughts you want to share? Did you read it or not really? Maybe not. I wouldn't blame you. Like, yeah, it is one of those. Like, I'm excited for the next part because it's like part two. Things change now from here on out to the book. Caught up with job haunting. Fair enough. Yeah, no, like I hope it changes up in the next parts where he talks about or introduces new things. But so far, yeah, it just seems like basic. Well, I think the interesting thing though is that at his time or like when he was writing this book, these behaviorist and like stimulus condition response stuff was like groundbreaking, or like it was just making its way into common knowledge. So I can see
Yeah.
why this read was really attractive back then, or like why picking up this book would be like super attractive back then. Um, but now I guess we just kind of like take it for granted that animals learn in this conditioned reaction or conditioned response way.
I, I still found it interesting. Maybe I don't have the same type of background in psychology, but I found it interesting that he like explicitly made the distinction between like a behavioral induction and like a verbal one. I never necessarily like I obviously I think I implicitly had like understood that you could behaviorally just recognize this without communicating it verbally, but I thought that was like an interesting distinction that he wrote, like he raised.
Yeah, he does make like I will give him or I will say that he makes things that are he brings things that we don't like clearly think about into light and fleshes them out perfectly for us to see. It's almost like if you have a filter, if you're like wearing sunglasses all day and then it's like that filters you could still see stuff. He like takes the filter off and like shows everything super clearly for the way it is, or at
Mhm.
least how this induction stuff is or this inference stuff is working when you're making the jump from verbal or from behavioral to verbal. Yeah. And he talks about one thing I've I don't know, have you guys thought about or like considered the whole problem of induction? Or at least like where do you
Mhm.
guys stand on that? Or how do you guys feel about that?
Uh, I only know, I only know it as raised by Hume, so I don't know like anybody else's
Yeah, no, that's how he's
um,
talking about it.
position.
Yeah.
Mhm. But I find it convincing.
Convincing like is it safe? Would you say then that you don't know that the sun is going to rise tomorrow?
um, yeah, I think it's safe to say that if it's via induction, it's not. You can't say it's irrational. It's just a non-rational product.
What does rational mean? That's a question I was kind of in the back of my head.
At least for Hume, it's deductively valid, if I remember.
Yeah, okay. Only past things can be deductively valid, or known things can be deductively valid. Maybe reasonable is a better word. It's reasonable to say,
Mhm.
I know the sun's gonna come up tomorrow.
I'd say it's
Yeah.
probably.
Probable.
Yeah.
So whenever you're making like a knowledge statement about something that might happen, you're just saying this will probably happen. That would just be a more accurate way.
I think so.
Yeah.
You don't know anything for certain, but using past experiences, kind of inferring that it will probably happen.
So at what point do we start using the word I know versus I probably think or like I think that probably like when we're like 99%
Well,
sure? Like,
or doesn't this also like I know like when you know those distinctions between like senses of knowing, uh, isn't that also, wouldn't that bring it in? Like what type of know? Like an acquaintance knowledge, or I don't know all the three terms, but
Yeah.
I guess that also can bring in like what are people expressing when they say I know the sun will rise tomorrow? What type of knowing are they using?
Yeah, there's a lot of different, like know is just a very loaded word, or knowledge is just like a really super loaded word. So everyone takes it to mean a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what confuses me? Like when people say like I know my body, or like I know what my body wants. It's like, isn't that just like you feel like you're hungry? When you say I know my body, it's like that just means you're feeling hungry. I feel like in
Join
common,
in here late, and
go for it,
apologies.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna put in because I heard you. Like, how do we know? Honestly, acting without emotions, acting in logical, like deductive reasoning, and then just the scientific method. And Rene Descartes kind of pioneered
Could you
the
speak up a
way for
tiny bit? You're
that.
cutting out.
Oh, sorry. 1 second.
You're good, you're good.
Okay, can you guys hear me a little bit better now?
Yeah. You're good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, not acting without, not acting with emotion, because anger clouds the judgment. I think I learned that from Plato, but psychology will teach you that as well. Um, I would say the scientific method is not with absolute certainty of knowing, but pretty close. I think was like pioneered like a lot of what I know about scientific method today was like from Rene Descartes, I think. I would say that would be the closest way. Doesn't give any interesting. There's not really much to expand off of there, guys. So my apologies, but your guys' input is much more interesting than mine thus far. But I mean, that's just me being basically primitive. I think I do. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, that is one of the points that he makes. He's like, if 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 this problem of induction is a serious problem, which I would think it is, Hume thinks it is, then it does pose a huge threat to scientific knowledge, because it builds itself off of past observations. It's constantly in a state of inductive reasoning. Because the experiments were that yesterday, then we can consider that knowledge and then build off from that. And it always happens to be the case, or it always has happened to be the case, that it follows properly, and that these rules and findings, they confirm themselves over and over again, but we're never positive, at least logically. We're never like logically sure that it will be the case again tomorrow. That paper will burn, or that water will be wet, and so on. That is a good point. What about things that seem a lot more, like, for example, if I jump from a if I jump out of an airplane without a parachute, I know I will die. It's like that seems very right to say, or very like correct to say. There doesn't seem to be anything.
Um, this reminds me of, and now I'm doing this off memory, so
You're good.
forgive me. But in my later medieval course, we read Duns Scotus, and in reply to like some arguments on divine illumination, he was basically trying to show we had certain knowledge.
Mhm.
And so he tried to show he made arguments for certain knowledge through experience. And in doing this, he showed how there are certain ways we could do it by specifically we could in some sense get self-evident terms like in like a matters of reasoning in like Hume's language. Um, through our experience, we can apply it in that manner, such that we could have uh knowledge. So I guess like is there not a way that you could get a more necessary principle and apply it to some experiential knowledge in some way? Like if I know that if I'm gonna jump off of this, I know that there are certain facts about what occurs between, like, I guess, like scientific facts about what occurs if you don't have this protection in the speed at which you drop, to which you can with more certainty say, I will know that this occurs. I don't know if this is kind of a half-formed thought, but
No, I get you, but I still think you're taking the facts you're given, like the scientific facts you might posit, like uh lose blood or break bones or anything like that. That's also, that seems to be inductive. Like it's like you're taking things that were understood scientifically in the past and then deducing from those facts.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think Russell's approach doesn't fully tackle the messy complexities of how subjective reality is constructed. Yeah, I mean, and at this part of the book, I hope it changes. I think he's gonna talk more about subjective stuff, but like at this point in the book, he's strictly talking about if it's possible or if we can uh observe objectively whether or not people have knowledge or whether or not people have um of these abilities to infer or these like stimulus or conditioned stimulus responses. I'm hoping that he talks more about the like the ability to know for yourself instead of just the ability to demonstrate that you know or to prove that you know. Because what he's saying here kind of, or at least like what I'm understanding, is that if you ask someone like pass the mustard and they pass you the correct bottle, they just demonstrated their knowledge. If you ask someone what the pin was for the password and they give you the right one and it works, then you can be even more sure that they had knowledge, and so on and so on. And it's just like this part of the book is demonstrating that other people have knowledge empirically, but it does completely miss out the subjective or the phenomenal aspect of knowledge. Yeah. So he talks about, so when he's saying, one thing I'm curious about is he talks about like when we reason or when we make these like associations, when we like learn things, that we are reasoning or we're like using reason. And that made me think, is reason reflex, like is reason a reflex? Is reason something we need to effortfully engage in, or does it just kind of automatically happen? Like imagine you see like a series of events, like imagine you have like dominoes. You see that one hits the other one. Is your reason automatically grasping that this caused that? Or do we need to try and effortfully understand that cause and effect relationship? Or is it just something like reflexive? Like we can't help but reason. And I think I'm more sympathetic to the latter. We can't help but reason. Like it can never be the case that you show someone a situation or a case of clear cause and effect and they not draw that conclusion automatically or immediately. If you see dominoes fall, you will always be like, okay, that caused that. You won't be able to just look at it in the same way that like if I show you a word, if I write a word in English and show it to you, you can't help but read it, or you can't help but understand that word. If I said the word like cat and I just showed it to you right here, it's like it's not like you can just look at those letters and not read cat. Do you guys get what I'm saying?
But is that not a learned response? You know, like because originally when you're younger, you don't see dominoes and see the fall. It's only after you've seen them fall in the past it becomes a reflex.
Yeah, but like yeah, the aftermath. Like once you've already learned English, or once it's a part of uh your own makeup, let's say, to like pick up these words and understand these words, we don't ever need to try. It doesn't seem like there's any effort going on when we're looking at a word and just like reading it. It's just like reflexive. Like there's no effort. And I'm just trying to think like is that the case with our ability to reason?
I guess it's the same as words in the sense of if you've reasoned something before, then it becomes quicker to reason in your head. Whereas if I read a word which I never come across in English, even though I know the language, it would still take me a while to read it and understand it because it's something I've never come across before. So it's the same with reasoning. If you give me a really difficult logical problem, it'll take me a while to reason it out. Whereas if I see dominoes, I can immediately kind of say that it's kind of one's going to fall to the other.
When you say like it'll take you a while to reasonably when it'll take you a while to figure it out, is that effort then that it requires effort? Can you look at a nonsensical word and not read it out? Like if I just said like, for example, if I show you guys this word right now, flib. You don't know that word, it's not a real word, but you like automatically read it. Or you automatically picked it up. And I'm just like, is that the case with reason? Do we just have this like predisposition?
Well, I think what you're saying does make sense in some sense, but I think it isn't a straightforward process. Sometimes it involves like where there are like complex situations, you would have to branch out into different directions to understand the situation, right? So I don't think it would be applicable here. The domino analogy that you made, I don't think that'll be applicable in this in such complex scenarios. But yeah, what you said is valid.
Yeah, I know that's what I've been like that's what I thought about earlier today when I was reading this. I'm like, reason just seems like a heartbeat or like breathing. Like humans just can't help but reason.
I think it depends. Because again, like flip, maybe I can understand 'cause it's a short word. But if you wrote a 20-character long word, and I started to read it, I don't have to reason the entire thing straight. I can't do it straight away.
Yeah. There's like an attention thing. Like we have a limited attention. What other things did this book make you guys like think of, or at least these chapters? Induction forms.
I guess I had a thought that I wondered about, which is, what do you guys think when he was talking about conditioning specifically in the emotional sphere? I was wondering how you guys would have thought that would relate to something like responsibility, like ethical responsibility.
Ooh, good question. Yeah, how can we throw morals or ethics at this conditioned response way of looking at the world? This is like cause and effect way of looking at the world. The behaviorist would probably answer something along the lines of, you were praised at certain moments in your life when you acted in ethical ways, and so you desire to act in similar ways in that form of like an ethical act, or like being nice or something like that, and you just want to continue doing that because before you received praise for it, so it was just like a learned response. I'm not satisfied with that, but I think that's how a behaviorist, like a strict behaviorist, would answer that question.
But also remember the example he gives where there, as a child, there's this person who is who's like bothering you, I think like pulling one of your limbs or something of that sort.
Yeah.
And then you later learn that the name the name of this person, and then you have the same associated reaction to that. And then you learn that they deal with lenses. What is it, optician or something?
Yeah.
And then so you don't like them then, and then you learn that Spinoza it was an optician, so you don't like him. So then you learn that Spinoza is a metaphysician and he's Jewish. So now you don't like people who are Jewish or metaphysicians.
Yeah.
And then I think he's like, now you're predisposed to the Ku Klux Klan or something of that sort. And I just kind of wonder, like, if you're giving that account, he almost gives like a non-responsible or a non-rational account for why you had this hateful association. And I don't know if this is really plausible. I don't know if anybody comes to hate Jewish people because because somebody who dealt with lenses pulled their limb when they were a child. But
Yeah.
I guess it's interesting to have that kind of step for how, because lots of times you could say like hateful reactions do have this non-rational character to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it could have this explanatory use, but also raises questions, I feel like, of moral responsibility, because in what sense do you say this person cannot or is in, like, they're doing a wrong thing, but what is the locus of like them as an actor who's wrong, if that makes sense?
I think, the behaviorist approach is deterministic. So I guess if you follow that line, I suppose, yeah, it's quite hard to hold people morally accountable for their actions. If you take a very strict behaviorist approach, it's pretty classic determinism, cause and effect relationship, one to the next to the next.
It's just that situations, beliefs, or thoughts are never so linear as he's talking about in the example with the optometrist and the kid with his arms being, because what's happening there is that it's like he goes from he does like A equals B, right? So being stretched out means you're being hurt. Being stretched out means there's a person grabbing me. So you go like one step, A equals C, and then you go A equals D. Being stretched out means this particular man is in the room. A equals E would equal this particular man with glasses. And then you go one step further. This particular man with who makes spectacles, the optometrist, he is causing pain. And then you just keep going further and further and further away from the original connection. But never is it so simple and so linear in real life.
Yeah, or nor do I even find somebody, or could I picture somebody like reasoning in that in that manner either. Like I feel like there's a degree to which there's not actually like a true one-to-one identity, or at least with emotional response in that way, or at least like I would feel like, right? Like,
Yeah, and that makes me think like humans are very interesting in that even if that were the case, even if it were the case that this baby developed hatred towards Jews and sympathized with KKK, he would not say it was because of this causal chain. He would come up, he would rationalize, as Freud says, some other type of reason for this hatred towards Jews. It's like if someone like you see it a lot with people who have phobias or like prejudices. Maybe say you hate dogs, right? It's not going to be because I was attacked when I was a kid. That could be an answer. But some people might just say, oh, it's because they're smelly and bad and I hate them and they're dumb. Some people will try and like give a different answer. And that's like a really interesting aspect of humans. That we like to like make up stories about why we believe the things we do that aren't entirely accurate. Hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I remember in psychology for my undergraduate degree, when we were looking at psychoanalysis, one of the things that we talked about is how, like, the false memories from Freud's female patients and stuff that believes that they had been sexually assaulted when in fact, yes, some of them did, but some of them created a false memory. And so it's really tricky because with sexual trauma and stuff, you're going to suppress it until you get to an early age because your brain's not at the appropriate age to even be able to comprehend what happened to you, especially when you're like a child. So it kind of makes sense.
Can you repeat that,
But
please?
yeah, I just wanted to put that in there.
Oh, like a bit
Oh,
louder.
sorry. Where did I leave off?
You're talking about like the sexual trauma in Freud's patients?
Yeah, for the sexual trauma for some of Freud's female patients, I mean, it wasn't until later on, I don't think, but a lot of the females that had reported sexual trauma, some of them didn't even actually have the trauma itself. It was like a repressed memory, but then upon further reflection, they were never sexually assaulted. And so, like, as like a mental health clinician myself, it's kind of like we can never know really truly if something had happened or has happened, because the human tendency at such a young age, like, repress that kind of thing. And for a long while in psychoanalysis, they were really trying to dig deep and try to uncover all the trauma possible. And yeah, they found out that some of these women who had really truly believed that they were sexually assaulted by a family member or brother, it's almost always a family member or their brother. It's rarely like a stranger. That, we can't really know fully. Some of them, it never happened, you know? And so nowadays, like as a mental health clinician, I have to be obviously you have to be touchy with trauma in general, but I would have to, I would have to hold the allegations with a grain of salt sometimes. I can't just automatically say sexual abuse, because, we really don't know. And they could they could believe that it happened, but there's no way to prove or disprove it. And for a lot of patients that had reported it, they didn't actually experience sexual assault, which is interesting,
I
but
think,
horrible.
yeah, when we're talking about it in practice, though, at least like in clinical practice or in psychology, I don't think it should like all of the importance should be placed on whether or not it did happen. It should be the suffering that came um from either false memory or actual occurrence. Like that should be the focus, the dealing with the
Absolutely.
suffering. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
because even
It's something that, like, when I have a client that reports it, I always document it. And, I'm very like, if I don't want to be specific because I don't want to re traumatize them, um, I'll usually ask, was it a family member? Because they don't want to mention that it was so and so. Was it a family member or someone else? And then I leave it that vague. But yeah, it's difficult because in the United States, at least, like, I have to document that. Like, I don't even want to ask them about the sexual trauma, even though it could be very beneficial in terms of like what treatment modality we implore. It's just, I have to ask it and it's not fun.
yeah, it's like the history of psychology or clinical psychology, psychiatry, I guess too, has always been incredibly dismissive of sexual assault cases or of any types of traumas and stuff. So that's kind of like that's always been the status quo. It's been that of dismissiveness or like no, that didn't actually happen. And although it can be sometimes the case where memories get mixed up and false memories arise and stuff like that, I it's always best like yeah, like as you said, to always just err on the side of empathy, of like be like yes, you know, of understanding and of treating the symptoms of trauma, I would think. Yeah,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
mhm. How long have you been working in
Sorry, I didn't mean to transfer this. I did not mean to. This is not
No, you're good.
pertaining to
That's
the
what book
book
club is.
club.
It's just like tangents on tangents.
Hey, that works for my mind.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Chris? My apologies.
No, I was just wondering like how long have you been working in clinical psych?
2 years. And it's in community mental health, which for any of you, it's just as awful as what it sounds. It's
Mhm.
basically like I work with a lot of people who don't have a shirt on their back. I see countless homeless people a lot of them, unfortunately, have schizophrenia. Which people with schizophrenia are actually my favorite clients to work with. That and high functioning autism, because they all have such different ways of looking at things, and I think those different ways of looking at things can teach us. Honestly, a lot of them are very philosophical, both of those for some reason. I don't know what it is. And I actually came across a client recently with psychosis who was telling me, and I kid you not, and he said that I have visions of and strong impulses and desires to eat another human being's flesh and know what that feels like. So cannibalism, cannibalistic thoughts. First of all time, I've talked to psychiatrists, psychologists. They're like, yeah, we've never encountered that. And I'm like, oh, nice. I'm glad that I get to encounter that. It was terrifying. And I'm like a giant person. So when I'm terrified, I can only imagine if he would have admitted it to someone else. But yeah, I was like, so let's send you to crisis.
Yeah.
We're gonna take you to the crisis department, buddy.
Huh.
And I've worked with him for a long time. Actually, I think I started in my second year, and he just recently got psychiatrically hospitalized, and I was just like, he was actually in the emergency, like not the emergency room, but he did end up going there and then got admitted into a inpatient psych facility. But before that, he was doing pretty good. But then I got a call from a crisis worker because I work with them, and he said, "Yeah, I just got off meeting this guy in the crisis department, and he was banging his head on the ground over and over again, begging for voices to stop, for those urges to stop." And I was just like, man, like, it's terrible. Sorry, folks. I mean, talk about therapy for me, right? Talking about that. But yeah, I don't know. 2 years. There you go, Chris. That's the question that you
Thanks for
were
answering.
wanting there.
Thanks.
Yes, anytime.
So like one, I guess coming back a tiny bit to Russell, any guesses or any predictions at how he should tie this model of knowledge or understanding with the subjective? Because so far it's just behavioral, what can be observed, how I can prove an animal's knowledge, and so on. What will he say about proving your own knowledge or proving your own experience? You're just gonna, like, is he gonna just attack it like a Cartesian, or because there's a huge aspect of consciousness that behaviorism totally misses the mark on, or is it totally kind of ignores? It completely ignores phenomenality.
or more, and this is, and I just started being able to actually read the text because I'm I'm starting I'm off school now. But this is the kind of more of a wonder about his method of like objectively just considering these things objectively. Isn't there, especially with something like induction, isn't there a sense in which an important part of knowledge, justification, is necessarily missed? Like somebody could have these inductive statement, like make these inductive statements, and this follow. But how does it necessarily follow if you're objectively regarding certain statements and certain things occurring, that there is the necessary justification to say that they know the thing?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important part of if you're talking about knowledge, as it's considered in one's internal experience. It's like they know a thing if they can actually talk about the parts of it, not if they just say the thing that's correct or that will follow.
Yeah. Or like also like where he talks about like examination and like when you the way you can prove the knowledge someone has of something is through an exam and then them writing the thing down on paper. Is that enough to prove that they know something?
Eh. Well, another part of that is like, I guess like the condition under which someone is, right? Like they could know it, or they could be able to communicate it, but say be tired or be hungry, and their memory may not be working as good, or whatever. There could be other extraneous factors that
Would you say then that the person still knows it
affect.
though? Intuitively, I want to say yes,
Yeah.
but it's unobservable or unprovable if someone's like really, really tired and can't answer the question.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. It would be an, at least if you're restricting it to that moment, right? Like, does person know a next moment? This thing.
Yeah, no, that's a huge chunk of knowledge that he seems to be missing out on here, or on explaining at least. Good point. Let's say you like learned a bunch of facts about, I don't know, the capitals of the world. The next day, you're sleep deprived, or maybe a little drunk or something. You're just not at 100%. You're asked these questions about what the capitals are, and you fail to answer. You wouldn't say that you don't know the capitals, because maybe in 24 hours or in a couple of days it'll come back to you and you will actually know what the capitals of those countries are. Is it just like unaccessible knowledge? Just call it inaccessible knowledge?
Or potential knowledge, maybe.
Yeah. And then also, if that's the case, if knowledge isn't something that needs to be immediately demonstrated, then I feel like we have a lot of knowledge. Because, like, I don't know, like, if you're primed, or if you're primed for something, you can remember facts or things. Peace out, Icarus. Thanks for coming. Like, there's probably facts that you aren't even aware that you know, unless I presented as maybe some like smells or a sound or something that'll evoke a memory and then like unlock a little thing in your brain and be like, oh wait, yeah, I did know that, or that did happen to me. Like
I mean, is this not just conscious and unconscious? Like from a Freudian perspective, a knowledge that's readily available to us in the conscious mind, and then in the unconscious, it kind of may take a stimulus or something like that.
Well, the unconscious is something like actively repressed, right? And so it's fighting you accessing it. There's like a degree which you can't even access it. But I guess this knowledge, it would still be accessible. It's not like there's, I don't know what the proper term is.
It could still like seep out. I don't know.
Yeah, like you don't need to sublate it to make it come through, or have some like clinical practice. It's just, or you don't have to fight it to get out. You just have to remember it.
It just comes out in like extremely rare particular instances, like the combination of you eating a bagel, then listening to a certain song, and then all of a sudden a memory pops into your head, or some fact pops into your head that you didn't have before. And in that
Preconscious.
Preconscious, maybe, yeah. So there, I think Russell's missing a huge portion of knowledge of what we can know. But I'm also like, if someone were to ask me what's the capital of Russia and I'm not able to answer, it's kind of like saying, like, it makes sense to say, oh, I just don't know. Even if I can be probed and queued later in a couple days, and then, oh wait, no, I do know. There does seem to be like a temporal importance of when you know something to say that you know it.
I guess there is a difference between stuff that you would never get with any prodding, and then stuff that you would with like a word or a letter.
Now, if we get really creative, like a thought experiment, for example, like imagine you like something like you saw a phone number on a bench, like one of those real estate ads. You almost never pay attention or learn of that phone number. But if I were some sort of like omnipotent, super smart psychologist that was able to prime you in the perfect way, would you be able to get back that information and tell me the phone number that you saw on that bench? Do you think it's possible? Or is that information lost and gone?
I think it depends on the person, but if it's your average person, I'd say it's lost.
Yeah, because it would require like consciousness, like the consciousness of that. Most of the time, there will always be an outlier. Maybe someone who's like intrinsically drawn to numbers as opposed to letters for whatever reason.
There's that type of like latent learning that he talks about. Almost like learning after the fact of something happening. Or the I forget what the term is, but like that type of aha learning. When you're like trying to solve a puzzle and then you can't figure it out and then time goes by and then you're like, "Oh, I do know how to solve it." Or like it's just like a random flashbulb of like knowledge comes up or like you remember it. I feel like it's always possible for you to have that about that phone number on the bench. If you randomly just had that aha, oh, I get it, I understood it. This was the phone number. It came back to me now. I think it's possible. Like it's not impossible. Cause like what's this? It's like information can never be truly destroyed, or that's this it's like issue in like science and physics. Like information can always be mixed up and stuff, but it can never be fully destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if I was the best psychologist ever who knew absolutely everything about everything, I would be able to prime you through a long sequence of discussion and song and sights and smells, and then you'd be able to tell me that phone number.
Or another thing, and I guess this is an appeal like to a phenomenological experience, but I feel like, at least for me, there's a distinction. Like, say you forget something, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just there's it's different to go back to something that you've forgotten, like especially for learning, like reading a text or going over a certain argument, um, and reading that argument or that text for the first time and trying to like make sense of it or track all the arguments as the first thing. There's almost a sense of there's already acquaintance with the premises or with the style or with its general structure, that it's more just an activation, rather than like a learning or a knowing. It's like coming to know.
Yeah, there's a novelty. Um, there's like a phenomenological aspect to novelty that can never be
Mm-hmm.
replicated just through remembering or reviewing. I think Dennett talks about that in one of his papers. He tries to make an argument for Mary or Frank Jackson's like apple in the room, red apple thought experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Dennett tries to say that you could invoke that phenomenological impression of the red apple by invoking a memory of the phenomenological experience of that apple. But that
Mm-hmm.
goes against, it seems like, this idea of novelty. Hmm. Any other things you guys want to talk about the book?
I know it's obvious, but I'm not paying attention. I'm here for the learning.
Dope. I think so. What we're gonna do next time is I have a guy messaged me. He recently graduated from McMaster's, I think, and he did his thesis, did a lot of studying on Russell and Wittgenstein. And he's like, "Can I run one of the book clubs or like do one of the book clubs?" So next one, I'm gonna hand it off to him and then let him kind of like run or present the next couple chapters, or part two, I guess, like introduce us to part two of this book, which is the physical world, and then see what he has to say. Because yeah, I want these to be like in the same way that in the Fear and Trembling book club, it was kind of Cade who would present the stuff or talk about the stuff, like someone who knows more about the topic than me, because I'm not very well read in Russell or anything like that. So it'd be cool to hear someone else's input. We'll see if he's still down, but he said he was down, so maybe it'll be someone else running it, which should be fun. Also, you guys, if there's something that you guys are really interested in, like, more than welcome to, we can read over it and then do it as the next book club or something like that. Should be cool beans.
Okay.
Dope.
I've read some of I Would Never Run One, but it's very interesting. I think you might find it interesting. You
Okay.
did
Yeah.
minor in psych, right?